What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. As I mentioned before the break, it is time to pull out the MLS Stress Meter. Now, I have built 4 categories for this, so we're going to go through 8 teams, 4 teams in the East, 4 teams in the West, that are in this jumbled mess of all of these teams that are basically at the exact same spot. I believe it is 7 teams across the 2 conferences that have 33 points exactly. It's bonkers. So, sort of the 4 teams I find most interesting and in the most curious, intriguing spots as we wind the regular season down. So we got 4 categories, and I have even built visual representations to go with these categories. So our first category is freaking out. This is highest level of the stress meter. It's hard for me to see a way for this team to make the playoffs, is basically what this part of the meter looks like. Second, we have stressed. This is the second highest level of stress on the stress meter. Plenty of things to worry about, but there's still some hope to hold on to, is basically how I view this category. Up next, as we go more and more positive, is concerned. This is more positive than negative, but there are certainly things to still be worried about. You don't feel safe at all. And then finally, we have optimistic. I didn't want to go any higher than this because the whole point is these teams are in the thick of a playoff race, so nobody is going to be anything more than optimistic. But this is, at the end of the day, I think it's going to work out okay. There are plenty of things to point to that suggest these teams are going to end up on the right side of the playoff line when it's all said and done. So our first team, Orlando City. 25 games played, 33 points, currently 6th in the East. However, they have the same amount of points as 9th place in the East. So they are tied for a playoff spot with 3 other teams, and in the heart of this jumbled mess that is the middle of the Eastern Conference. They are winless in 5. 3 of those are losses before they beat the New York Red Bulls over the weekend in a game in which they had 2 shots. No, not 2 shots on target, 2 shots. And here is Orlando's remaining schedule. At Charlotte, another team right in the thick of the playoff race. NYCFC, Seattle, at Miami, at Philadelphia, Atlanta, Toronto, at NYCFC, and then Columbus. That is a bunch of teams battling for the same playoff spots as you, and a bunch of teams already safely in the playoffs, including 3 games against the 2 teams I would deem to be the best in the Eastern Conference. And the team I don't want to play in the Columbus Crew, and the team you never want to play in the Seattle Sounders. Which means the stress level is freaking out for Orlando City. I just mentioned the schedule and their recent struggles. They're not scoring goals. They don't have a reliable goal scorer. And the other part of this for me is that, and I talked about this when I did my midseason power rankings, they are still the most overachieving team in this league when you look at expected goals and the way things have actually gone. They have way outperformed their XG in terms of the difference between their goals scored and their expected goals and their expected goals allowed. Everything suggests this is going to continue to go down a bad road. And some of these teams right behind them, I feel pretty good about. And one of them has, Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi on it. So, if I'm Orlando City, stress meter, we're freaking out. Up next, Inter Miami. Incredibly consistent at being inconsistent this season, but 33 points, 25 games played. Again, they're in this jumbled mess. Currently 7th, holding on to that final playoff spot. That win they got over NYCFC was absolutely massive. And the other really good news here is they are getting decent production from that number 9 position. Gonzalo Higuain has been very good recently. And they also have this little thing called, the addition of Alejandro Pozuelo because Toronto had to get rid of him to bring in the Italians. I am always hesitant to really buy into this team until they prove they can put together from start to finish a season. But I've got them optimistic on the stress meter. I look at the teams around them. I fully expect Orlando to drop out. So even if you're assuming there's a team or two coming from behind you, I still think they're in good position. They're unbeaten in 4, and this recent run of good form has coincided with Alejandro Pozuelo, which is a reason to believe it's not just going up and down again because they had a really bad stretch right before this really good stretch, as they have all season. It's a stretch of bad, a stretch of good. But I have faith in Alejandro Pozuelo. I've liked what I've seen from this team recently. And I just, from their position right now, I don't see it as incredibly daunting to get over the line and end up on the right side of the playoffs and get in. So, I might come back to regret it, but I'm going optimistic for Inter Miami. The Chicago Fire are up next. Currently 10th in the East, 30 points from 25 games. And of course, this has all come from this remarkable turnaround they've had in the past month and a half. I believe in the turnaround. The schedule is not all that daunting. The issue here is quite simply, right there, these 4 teams on 33 points, and Chicago's behind them. And there's also Toronto behind Chicago. So all of that being taken into consideration, I've gone with stressed. If there was more time and Chicago could have gotten themselves in a better position, or if they had gotten a point in Philly over the weekend, I probably would have this at concern. I'm not, again, they got handled by the best team in the Eastern Conference on the road. That doesn't change how I feel about them. My biggest concern here is, do they have enough to catch all these teams ahead of them and hold off the teams behind them? I see a pathway for them to do it, which is why I'm not at freaking out. I just think there's an awful lot of work to do when you're looking at essentially 2 spots here and you've got Toronto knocking on your door. Speaking of Toronto, here we go, our final team from the Eastern Conference. It is working. The plan is going exactly as Bob Bradley had hoped. They have already made up ground. They're only 4 points back of 6th place, again, because all these teams are on 33 points. They have 29 through 25 games. So they've got 9 games left, plenty of time. What they did, and particularly what Insigne and Bernadeschi did against Portland, in a game Toronto was very good, took the lead, gave up a goal kind of out of nothing, and were in danger of dropping 2 points at home. My tone would have changed dramatically had they drawn that game. Because then you're having a very different conversation. You're talking about being 6 points back with all of these teams to catch, because they're still in 12th. That is something that needs to be acknowledged here. And you just drop 2 points at home. But instead, the Stars deliver. They got 2 late goals. And so now they are right there in the thick of this thing. And so my stress level is optimistic, partially because I just believe in what they're doing, as I think almost everybody does, and partially because they're playing all the teams in front of them coming up here. they're going to be able, there is a clear path for them to make this ground up and get themselves where they need to be by the end of the season. They really gave themselves a mountain to climb by the time they actually got this team onto the field. But they have been so good since all the pieces came together and everything else has kind of worked in their favor that now this is very much, as bizarre as it sounds to say for a team stuck so far behind in the table, this is very much in their control to the extent that it's possible for a team 4 points back of a playoff spot to be in control of their own destiny. Toronto is, because they're playing all these teams in front of them. Okay, on to the Western Conference with the LA Galaxy to kick things off here. They've lost 5 of 7. Both the wins in that stretch came at home. They were over the Vancouver Whitecaps and Atlanta United, so nothing to write home about. And yet still, they are in 6th place with only 24 games played. Well, almost everybody else has played 25 or 26, so they have games in hand. They also face Seattle and Nashville still. And by the way, have the second best goal difference in the Western Conference behind LAFC. It's easy to point to the things that are going wrong for the Galaxy. And, you know, Ricky Pooch coming in too certainly helps. It's not like it's been spectacular. But my stress level is just concerned because I'm just kind of looking around them and everybody else has work to do to catch them. Again, they've got this game in hand. If they can at least get draws in these head-to-head matchups that they're going to have with Seattle and Nashville, there's just the logical part of me feels very, very good about where the LA Galaxy are at, and the sort of instinctual, observational part of me looks at the teams behind them and is terrified. But the more I dug into this, they are just in a pretty good spot. Was certainly not going to go optimistic, but they just have too much of a cushion for me to go stressed either. So I'm going with concerned. Speaking of Nashville FC, they are up next on the stress meter. Offensively, it hasn't been great. There is just nobody who scares you in attack other than Hani Mukhtar. And 3 of their final 8 games are against LAFC and Austin, which maybe turns out to be a good thing if there's some squad rotation in there because they don't have much to play for. But I don't want to play LAFC's B team either. So there's that part of the schedule. And, of course, they're also staring at the Portland Timbers and Seattle Sounders right behind them, and that absolutely terrifies me. So I'm going with stressed for Nashville. I'm not going to freaking out because I still believe in this team. They have done too much in their short time in Major League Soccer for me to start hitting all the alarm bells when they are still in 7th place with their 33 points. There are absolutely things to be concerned about. I'm not sure there are 2 teams I would want to avoid more chasing me than the Sounders and Timbers. And also, right, they've got work to do to catch the Galaxy, so it's getting really tight, which is why I wasn't going to go too concerned. But there's also part of me that thinks they find a way to get this done and hang on to that spot. Our last 2 teams, Portland and Seattle. We're going to do Yeah, we'll do Portland next. 8th place right now in the Western Conference. Only one loss since May 28th. That is getting glossed over a little bit, I feel like. Now, yes, there were a lot of draws in there. But that loss came in that game I just mentioned at Toronto, which, A, they almost got a point from, and B, there are maybe one or two more difficult games in Major League Soccer right now than at Toronto. I would argue it's number 2 behind at LAFC. So I'm just not worried about that. They play Kansas City, Seattle, Atlanta, and a bunch of playoff teams, though. The schedule is not the softest. And all that leads to concern, is where I'm putting them on the stress meter. I trust this team. I trust this manager. They have been consistently picking up points, even if they're not winning every single game, for multiple months now. Again, they were like Toronto, dug themselves this huge hole, but they were getting out of it and had gotten themselves back into the playoff picture before this loss. So they're right there with all of these other teams on 33 points. I see a spot potentially to be had. And the other part of this in the Western Conference is maybe RSL falls apart. You kind of keep waiting for RSL to take a step back, and they haven't really done it, which is a credit to them very quietly. Because you look at all these teams, right? Then it's the Galaxy, it's Nashville, it's Portland, it's Seattle, all chasing them. And there's a really good chance that those 4 teams, those 4 huge brands, or Nashville in terms of recent success, 4 of the best teams in the Western Conference, or / biggest in the Galaxy, are all going to be very possibly fighting for 2 spots. But that is part of this too, is there's a chance that another spot opens up. So I'm going with concerned for the Portland Timbers. And then, of course, our final team, Seattle Sounders. I've been talking about this for a couple weeks now, this incredibly difficult stretch they're on. Next 3 games at Los Angeles Galaxy, at Portland Timbers, at Orlando City. All teams all teams trying to make the playoffs. Good luck with that one. But after they get through that, the schedule drops off considerably, and there are plenty of points to be had. And the reality of the situation is, as poorly as the season has gone, I still believe they are a better roster, a better team than 8 of the 9 teams they're going to play. The exception being Austin. Austin's been terrific this season. I could see him going into LA and winning. I could see him going into Portland and winning, though I wouldn't bet on it. I can absolutely see them going into Orlando and winning. If you can come away with 4 points from that stretch and then really kick things into gear, it's probably going to be enough. So out of respect for the Sounders, I wasn't going any farther than concerned. They've done it too many times. This group is too battle-tested. I've been saying that for months, and they haven't exactly hit their stride and done that thing where they run through the summer and all of a sudden you look up and they're second in the Western Conference and the team that nobody wants to play. But I'm kind of to the point, and I feel like they deserve respect to the degree that until they mathematically can't make the playoffs, I'm kind of just going to keep betting they're going to. But they are running out of time. This 3-game road trip is going to be massive, starting with that Galaxy game. Because if they lose all 3, 2 of them to direct rivals for these final 2 playoff spots, they're in some real trouble. If they, say, win 1 against the Western Conference teams and beat Orlando, they're in really good shape with the rest of their schedule. course, they still got to take care of business and and win those games. But they are in a decent spot here, and these head-to-head games, right? Somebody's got to take points from them, and I'm going to bet on the Sounders to rise to the occasion before I bet on the Galaxy or even the Timbers. So, wasn't going any lower than concerned. Certainly wasn't going optimistic because they still have work to do. And the other part of this, too, is they do have that extra game. They've only played 25. So from a points per game standpoint, they're actually not in a terrible spot when it comes to trying to catch Nashville and Portland. So despite how every time it looks like they get things going, they have another bad loss, I still think they find a way in the end to get this done.